This is my happy place. I'm not even joking. This is the place that I come when I want to feel truly happy. r/LifeofNorman. Oh, how I've missed you. Norman loses his balance. After watching the credits to CSI, as Norman always does, he turned off the TV and headed to bed. As he was ascending the stairs, Norman realized he was thirsty. I'm already halfway up the stairs, Norman thought. Am I thirsty enough to warrant going back down? Whilst in the midst of this perplexing dilemma, Norman had become distracted and didn't realize that the stairs had ended. He put his foot down on what he was expecting to be the top step, but instead found nothing and lost his balance. Norman was filled with terror as he found himself falling, but he corrected his balance by catching the wall with his left hand. His heart still pounding from his near-death experience, Norman had a hard time falling asleep, but at least he was no longer thirsty. Yes, Norman discovers Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Always go back down. You're gonna be thirsty in the morning. Get yourself a drink, Norman. You deserve it. Norman avoids an awkward situation. During his lunch break, Norman was using the restroom. He always made sure to only go to the bathroom on break, so he wouldn't waste any of the company's time. Suddenly, the door opened. A pair of feet appeared and began to walk towards the stall that Norman was currently occupying. Norman froze. What if the owner of those feet tried his stall door? He would have to say, "Occupied," and Norman always felt uncomfortable talking to someone whilst he was squatting on a toilet. Thinking quickly, Norman forced himself to cough. The noise echoed through the small room, the feet paused, and then turned on a new path. Norman heard the door of the stall next to his open and shut. Crisis averted. His heartbeat slowing, Norman set about finishing his business. Has his heart been beating since last night, Norman? You might want to have that looked at. And the situation really is only as awkward as you let it be. You know, that stranger could turn into your pooping buddy if you just open the door and allow them to make a human connection. Come on, Norman. I know you could do it. Norman buys a treat for Norman. It was Sunday, the usual day for Norman to go grocery shopping. He carefully went down his list, checking off each item as he put them into his cart. Next item on his list was some food for Norman. He walked over to the pet food aisle and found the usual bag of food that Norman liked. Right next to the food were cat treats. Norman didn't usually like to stray from his list, but Norman had been such a nice cat over the years that Norman decided that he would show a little appreciation to Norman. Norman spotted a small bag of treats made by the same brand that made Norman's food. He decided on that, but with a tuna flavor. Norman felt a bit giddy as he placed the cart into the bag. He was happy to get a little treat for his friend, and he hoped he liked it. When Norman got home, he unpacked his groceries and then opened the bag of treats. He grabbed one from the top of the bag and gave it to Norman. Norman sniffed it for a few seconds, then grabbed it from Norman's fingers and happily ate it. Aw, I do love the Norman bouncing back and forth and you're trying to figure out which Norman's the actual Norman and which is the cat Norman. Bless up to both of the Normans, that's what I say. Norman's nickname. Norman was sitting in his cubicle and realized that he was thirsty. Bro, you always dehydrated. What's happening here? He decided to get a drink of water from the cooler. I'll be quick. He wasn't paid for strutting around the office all day, after all. Setting off down the corridor, he noticed Dennis walking towards him. Dennis worked in sales, or maybe marketing. He was a big, burly man, always cheerful, but a bit too forward for Norman's taste. "Hey, Norm, how's it going, buddy?" Dennis bellowed from the other end of the corridor, a big grin on his face. Norm. Norm? Norman didn't care for that nickname, not one bit. Dennis was the only one using it too, which somehow made it worse. This time, I'm gonna tell him, Norman thought to himself. My name is Norman. Please be so kind as to call me by my name. It was a bit harsh, Norman admitted, but he wanted to make his point very clear. He really didn't care for that nickname. My name is Norman. He rehearsed what he was gonna say in his mind. Dennis was now 15 feet away. My name is Norman. 10 feet. My name is Norman. 6 feet. My name is Norman. 3 feet. "Hello, Dennis," Norman said as they passed each other. So you know exactly how it's gonna end, but the buildup is like a big maybe moment. Maybe he will take the power. Oh, he's not gonna do it. Why do you not ever do it? He's just Norman, I guess. Oh my God, Norman gets Pokemon Go. That's exciting. Norman had been hearing all this news about Pokemon Go and decided to download the app on his new smartphone. He remembered Norman Jr. used to be obsessed with Pokemon in his younger years, and now that it was making a comeback, he decided to see what all the fuss was about. He created his character, naming it Norman 1970 because Norman was already taken. "Boy, there sure are a lot of Normans in the world," he said to Norman, scratching him behind the ears. He chose his monster. He thought the blue little turtle looked cute. Oh my God. Norman is a Blastoise, Chad. I'm so proud of you. Now what? Norman thought to himself. Nothing was happening. He thought maybe Norman Jr. would know. He texted him. "Hi, Norman. I just got that new Pokemon app. Have you got it yet?" Almost immediately, he received a reply. Excitedly, Norman checked his phone. "Hey, Dad. Yeah, it's great. And it's Pokemon." Confused by that last sentence, but ignoring it, Norman replied, "Yeah, it is fun. Is there a way for me to be friends with you on it?" "No, not yet." I guess this was posted 7 years ago. That's true. Disappointed, Norman replied, "Okay, well, have fun. And don't forget to turn on Words with Friends." Oh God, you're tearing my heart out. I play like 2 games of Words with Friends against my grandma, and she crushes me, and then I quit. She's the only person that I really want to play and connect with, but she just beats me so bad, my ego can't handle it. Anyways, that part cut me deep, man. Norman didn't receive a reply. Well, he must be busy playing that new Pokemon game, thought Norman. He opened up the app again, but still didn't understand what to do, and couldn't find any instructions. Sighing, Norman laid down his phone and turned on an old episode of CSI. About 30 minutes in, his phone buzzed with a notification that Norman Jr. had played a word. I'm gonna reinstall Words with Friends tonight. Anyway, moving on. Norman can't get comfortable. I mean, he's not comfortable in his own skin. Norman lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. He couldn't get comfortable. His neck felt like it wasn't quite at the right angle, no matter which way he turned. He didn't want to have a stiff neck in the morning. His room was quite warm. Not warm enough to make him take off his check pajama shorts, but warm enough for him to mildly consider opening the window slightly. Norman was scared of being burgled. He dare not open the window. Norman turned over and thought about tomorrow's workday. The alarm rang and he jolted awake. His neck hurt. Are you somehow surprised by this, Norman? This is what happens when we start getting on in years, you know? At this point, it's just a fact of life, and we gotta deal with it. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. Norman breaks down. Norman was driving to his relatives when his car broke down. Oh, I thought he was having like a psychotic break. That's good. I'm glad it's just the car, Norman. Norman had seen that check engine light was on, but he had mistaken it for the change oil light. You're not very good at cars, are you, Norman? Norman was very distraught, but was very glad that he paid his auto insurance. He called them up and explained the situation, and they told him to expect a tow within the hour. Norman turned on the emergency lights in his car, and then called up his relatives to explain that he would be a little late. To pass the time, he took a Sudoku book out of his glove compartment and waited for the tow truck. After solving about 3 puzzles, the tow truck arrived and took his car to the nearest garage. When Norman got there, he realized he was pretty close to his relative's house and simply walked the rest of the way. Well, hey, sometimes things work out, don't they? Everything's gonna be just fine until that bill shows up. And then I don't know, good luck. Norman chats with his son. It was a Wednesday evening, and Norman had just sat down to watch some CSI when he heard his phone beep. His heart started to race. See, there goes Norman's heart again. Get it checked out, man. When he saw that it was a text message from Norman Jr. He hadn't heard from his son in a while, but Norman figured it was because Norman Jr. was very busy now that he was attending college. Norman flipped open his phone and read the message. It said, "I'm doing pretty good. How about you?" Norman was perplexed, but then his phone let out a second beep. "Oops, sorry, texted the wrong person." Norman texted back, "That's okay, son." He made sure to double check his spelling, and then he pressed send. Norman sat back in the seat and felt warm all over. He was glad that Norman Jr. was doing well. That's one thing I love about Norman. He doesn't really begrudge anybody for the things that they do. They go about their lives, he goes about his. Everybody's happy. There's no expectation, so there's no disappointment. It's really big brain time if you think about it. Norman gets drunk. Oh, that's so unlike you. It was early evening as Norman sat, pen in his hand, eyes fixed upon his newspaper, wrapping up the last few puzzles in his crossword. He took a sip from his glass of iced water as he pondered the possibilities for the final solution. Norman read the hint again. 23 across. Intoxicated. He thought for a moment as he glanced at Norman sitting on his lap. With a smirk of satisfaction, Norman penciled in the letters D-R-U-N and K to finish the crossword. Quite pleased with his answer, he took another sip of water. "See, you're taking care of that thirst problem that you was having." I'm glad Norman's not a drinker. It makes me like him more. Although if he did get wasted, he probably would really cut loose, but you don't want to see that. Norman goes to Starbucks. Oh, the caffeine? Yeah, he's getting real amped up. It's a slippery slope, Norman. Slippery slope. Norman woke up to the blaring of his alarm clock. Norman felt particularly poorly rested, as he had stayed up an extra hour the previous night watching CSI. He showered, dressed, brushed his teeth, and went to the kitchen to make some coffee. Norman carefully placed a filter in the single-cup coffee maker, measured out precisely 2 scoops of coffee, and turned it on. And nothing. Norman came to the sinking realization that the coffee maker was broken. Norman felt the edge of a caffeine headache coming on and decided that he would buy coffee on the way to work. Soon after, Norman pulled into the parking lot of the local Starbucks. He walked into the shop and stood there for several minutes, attempting to make sense of the menu. Feeling rather awkward, Norman just left and made himself a cup of coffee at the office. And it's free. That's what it's really all about. I'm not paying $3-4 for a black coffee. You missed me with that. I know Norman doesn't register the feel-good fancy feeling of walking around being like, "Look, I got Starbucks, you guys." Which I think is like a lot of the reason that people go. Whatever. We'll get on into the next story, see what happens. Norman is happy. Oh, I love it. Norman was sitting outside when he had the idea of walking a bit. He didn't want to waste the whole day indoors, so he went outside and felt the sun shining on this cold winter day. There was no sound, except songs sung by the birds. That moment, he finally felt at peace. Norman was happy. After a few minutes, Norman walked home. When he arrived, he found his owner, Norman, laying on the couch, watching TV. They got me again. He would probably never experience the happiness that Norman had felt that day. Who's happier than a cat? You answer me that. Heh, that rhymes. Norman is famous. It was a quiet Thursday night. Norman, with Norman peacefully curled up in his lap, was watching a CSI rerun that he had only seen once or twice before as he wound down from his long day. As he sat quietly in the darkening living room, Norman's thoughts began to wander. He thought of his coworker Lisa and the brownies that she was bringing into the office the next morning. He thought of earlier in the day when he had misspelled a word in an email to his boss and consequently thought he was going to be fired for it. He thought of Norman, asleep in his lap, and how easy the life of a house cat must be. When he heard it, somebody said his name. His mind immediately came back to attention. He swore he had heard it, and he was right.
"Officer Norman, I have a piece of information you'd like to hear."
Norman smiled. How nice it is of them to include my name. Shortly thereafter, the episode ended, and Norman made his way to bed. He dreamed of being the Officer Norman portrayed in the show, and he smiled in his sleep. Norman, is your boss abusive? You think you're going to be fired over a misspelled word in an email? That's probably the most concerning thing of all. And you could be a CSI police guy if you wanted. Although the first time somebody shoots at Norman, I think he's probably going to rethink every choice he ever made. Norman gets kissed. Norman was in the checkout line of the grocery store. The woman in front of him had just finished paying and started to leave. As the cashier started to ring Norman up, he realized that the woman left behind her wallet. Quickly, he retrieved her wallet and called after her. His heart pounding, the woman turned around and headed back to him. "Thank you so much," she exclaimed. "I don't know what I would have done." Before Norman could say anything, she gave him a quick kiss and was on her way. Norman blushed as he awoke to the sound of his alarm clock. "Norman, I just had the most unusual and exciting dream," he proudly told his best friend. Norman started his day in a better mood than usual. "Nah, man, wrap it up, go to sleep. Let's find the dream girl again. She kissed me."
She want me. She want me. She want me.
I couldn't title these stories. I'd name it something weird. Be like, Norman gets morning wood. Let's not do that. Anyways, moving on. Norman gets a call. Norman had been catching up on CSI when he heard his phone ring. Wondering who it could be, he fished it out from between the couch cushions, and his son's number was on the caller ID. It had been a while since his son had just called him out of the blue. He paused his current episode and picked up the phone. "Hey, son, how's it going?" Norman answered cheerfully. "Oh, hey, Dad. I meant to call Dan." "My bad," replied his son, hanging up the phone without even waiting for a reply. Norman turned back to the TV and resumed his episode of CSI. "It's okay, Norman. Just breathe. You're gonna get through this." At a certain point, Norman Jr. is gonna realize that you really do need to bond with your parents, but right now, he's separating. He's just left the nest. It's gonna be okay, or so we tell ourselves. Norman shouts at Lisa. Oh my god, I thought they had a will they won't they thing going on. I guess the answer is they won't. Norman instantly regretted the email after he had sent it. Earlier that morning, Lisa had said to Norman that he had to change his password because it was getting too old. Norman had not considered it before. He only had one password, and it worked for all of his accounts. Which brings us to today's sponsor, not... He logged in and was prompted to enter a password of at least 6 characters. He typed, Norman. Seems secure. The computer replied, "This password has been used previously. Please enter a new password." "Of course," Norman whispered under his breath. He typed, Norman with a capital N. The computer responded, "Your password should include at least one uppercase character and one numeric character." Norman typed, in all caps, N0RMAN. Norman had substituted the letter O with the numeral 0. He was quite pleased with his ingenuity. Delightfully devilish Norman. Though he did worry that he might forget his new password, so he wrote it on a post-it and stuck it to his monitor. As soon as his account opened, Norman went directly to his email and said, "Hi, Lisa, that wasn't nearly as hard as expected." A chill shot through his spine. He quickly followed up with, "I'm sorry, Lisa. I didn't mean to shout. I accidentally left the caps lock on." How does one man contain all this nervous energy? Norman hoped he wasn't too late. An email pinged back from Lisa. It seemed to be an emoticon of some sort. Norman had seen one of these before. He realigned his eyes vertically and saw a face with a tongue sticking out. He knew it was meant jokingly, but he couldn't help but note if it weren't for the tongue sticking out, then the emoticon's mouth would not be a smile, but a flat line. He would make sure to apologize to Lisa in person. I'm proud of Norman for not being terminally online, but how do you deal with all this things? This is why he has heart problems. You realize that, right? Just take a big old chill pill, Norman. If you want, I could sell you some lewds, man. But yeah, I guess the nervous energy is what makes him relatable. Anyways. Norman does the laundry. It was Sunday morning, which meant it was time for Norman to do laundry. He separated his clothes into lights and darks. It's important to wash them separately, Norman thought to himself. He wasn't sure why, though. Norman picked up the laundry basket full of light clothes and started toward the machine, only to notice that Norman was sleeping on top. I'll do the darks first. Might as well let Norman rest a little while longer. After Norman set down the basket of light clothes, carefully so as not to wake up Norman, and he put his darks into the washing machine, he sat down to watch an episode of CSI. When it was done, he noticed that the washing machine wasn't making any noise. Time to start my lights! Norman liked washing his light clothes more. When he got to the washing machine to take his dark clothes out, however, Norman noticed that he had forgotten to even start it earlier. Oh, heavens, Norman thought. I can be so forgetful. Norman started the machine and sat down for another episode of CSI. Are you sure that your brain is not tricking you because you like CSI so much that you just supposedly forgot to start it? Probably because you were so excited to watch CSI. It's all he has in this life. Let him have it. Also, I'm amazed that you can do all your laundry on one day. I guess if you're just one person, that works. But we got a big family now. The laundry's just, it's always never ending. Norman and Lisa feel a spark. Oh, here they go again. Back to the will they, won't they? Norman was working so hard, he hadn't realized how uncomfortably warm he had become. Must be like 75, 76 degrees in here, Norman thought, as he rocked back and forth to remove his woolly sweater vest. His shirt became untucked for a moment as he extended his arms over his head. Just then, Lisa peeked into his cubicle. She pretended that she hadn't just seen Norman's pale stomach, as she smiled and quietly gestured for Norman's attention. Oh, hi, Lisa, Norman said, with an embarrassed grin as he pulled his shirt back down. Hi, Norman. Say, do you have some liquid paper I could use? Norman thought in silence for a moment. I think so. He checked the drawer. Lisa came closer. I made a mistake on my report, she explained. Norman chuckled knowingly and continued to look. Here it is, Norman said with excitement. He felt very useful. Such a human experience. He wheeled his chair towards Lisa and handed it to her. Just then, a shock jumped from his finger to Lisa's wrist, and they both jumped a little. Ouch, Lisa said, somewhat playfully. Well, thanks for the liquid paper. I'll bring it back soon. I'm not sure why that happens, said Norman with a laugh, but Lisa was already gone, and she never did return the liquid paper. Bro, she went into the bathroom and sniffed it. That's what Lisa is. She's a glue sniffer. I don't know if you could get high off liquid paper. But you know that Lisa, anything to catch a buzz. She's bad news, Norman. I don't want to see you creating any more sparks with that girl, all right? Norman accidentally goes to the bathroom. In his pants! No, just kidding. It was the middle of the afternoon, and Norman got up from his desk to go make some copies. After walking for a minute, he suddenly realized that he had absent-mindedly turned down the hall towards the bathroom instead of the one towards the copy room. There were other people walking around the office, and Norman didn't want to look foolish by just turning around in the middle of the hallway. Who hasn't been there? You're just so human, Norman. What a precious little guy. Instead, Norman just kept walking and walked right into the bathroom. There were also other people in the bathroom, so Norman walked to the sink and rinsed his hands for a second so that it would look like he had had a reason for coming in. Then he left the bathroom and headed to the copy room. As he made his copies, Norman thought to himself that he'd have to pay more attention to where he was walking next time. I just love Norman, always getting up to his Norman shenanigans. Will he never learn? I guess we'll find out, won't we? Norman can't decide. Cheddar or mozzarella? Norman was in the grocery store, deciding on cheese for his dinner. A woman next to him must have noticed that he was unsure. I really like brie, she said to Norman. Norman thought it was rude to ignore the stranger and picked up the brie. Thanks, he said as he walked away. Norman doesn't really like brie. I think she was trying to put the moves on you, Norman. I don't know that this was actually about the cheese. And I don't actually know that cheddar versus mozzarella is even a debate. You like the sharp taste of cheddar? I can't fix you. Go for the chewy taste of mozzarella. I guess chewy isn't really a taste, but it doesn't need a taste. That's how good the mouthfeel is. I know which hill I'm dying on. Norman had to use the bathroom at work. Again, bro? You're gonna need to get your kidneys checked out too. Norman had to use the bathroom at work. As he entered, a man he didn't recognize was exiting. Sorry, Norman said, as the man slipped past and Norman stood holding the door. He wasn't sure why he apologized. I need to stop doing that, Norman thought. He wouldn't. Just apologize to everybody. That way you won't offend nobody. There will be no conflict. Unless there's conflict over why you apologize so much. You just can't win in these days and times. Norman stays up late. Norman looked at the clock. 8:58. 2 minutes until bedtime. He walked to his pillbox and picked out his melatonin tablet. He walked to the sink to fill up his glass and thought about a conversation that he had overheard that day at work. His new coworker Jeff had walked out a minute before 5 and yelled, TGIF, party demon, whoa! Norman had never really been especially excited about Fridays, since it usually just meant 2 days of trying to fill time with puzzles and Norman's walks, but he decided to embrace Jeff's enthusiasm. He placed the melatonin back in Friday's compartment and drank his water quickly, tossing his head back as he finished. He set the glass down loudly on the counter, pulled out the new Extreme Sudoku book that he had gotten at last year's Office Secret Santa, and began working on a puzzle. Not just any puzzle either. Norman flipped to the last puzzle and began filling in the boxes. In pen! TGIF indeed. Oh yeah, ride the lightning, Norman. Look at him go. He's getting too wild for me. Honestly, you're making me uncomfortable. You're sort of going off the rails, Norman. Do we need to have an intervention? This could be the start of something very dark. Norman's lucky day. Oh, we're getting lucky. Today, Norman was feeling very special. In his newspaper, Norman came across the horoscope section. Curious as to what it would say, Norman searched in his mind for his birthday and found his zodiac. Cancer, he muttered as he saw the name of his zodiac. Initially, Norman was scared of this name, but then he saw the prediction of how his day would be filled with luck. Done reading this, he already felt much more luckier. Yeah, that's double plus good. It's much more luckier. Also, I don't know anything about Cancer as a zodiac sign, so maybe the comments can enlighten me there. Thanks so much. Hey, also, if you watch this far in the video, maybe you're enjoying it, maybe you should subscribe, because we do stuff like this a lot. Thank you so much. Anyways, once Norman arrived at work, he saw that the perfect parking spot that had been reserved for him was still untaken. Huh. Happily, Norman parked his car, then pulled out his briefcase and went into the office. First, though, he made a stop at the break room. Norman usually gets his traditional brew of coffee before beginning his work. Today, though, when he went in, on the table was a box of donuts with a sign saying, "Take one." Inside was the last sprinkled chocolate donut, Norman's childhood favorite. He took his steaming mug of coffee and the donut and bit into it contentedly. After work, he went home to make dinner for himself and Norman. He reached his hand into the fridge to take the unopened 5-pack of bacon. When he opened it, he found an extra slice, and a small grin formed on his face. Tonight, he'd have his grilled cheese and bacon sandwich, and he could have an extra slice of bacon while enjoying the season finale of CSI. For Norman, there really was nothing more that he could wish for today. I'm glad Norman out there doing a thing, getting lucky and whatnot, but I hope this doesn't turn him into an astrology guy. Norman will be like, "Oh, you're such a Sagittarius." Yeah, sorta. What does that mean? Nobody knows. That's why you can just say it. Anyways. Norman reads an email. As Norman sat at his desk reading an email from his boss, he propped his arm up on the desk and rested his cheek on his fist. The skin on the side of his face bunched up, and Norman observed that he could now see slightly less out of his left eye. Norman lowered his arm and straightened his posture. "What is this, Norman? Seems to me like you're burning up good company time, doesn't it?" I'm sure Norman did feel some level of guilt about it later on. He won't even poop while he's on the clock, for God's sake. Anyways, one more, and then we wrap it for the day. Norman doesn't win Employee of the Month. Oh, come on. He really deserves... I just said he doesn't poop on company time. He deserves it more than any of us. Norman was excited. It was the second Wednesday of the month, and that meant that the Employee of the Month would be announced. Not only did they get their name put under a plaque reading Outstanding Employee, they would also receive a bonus to their paycheck. Oh, that's the part that's really important. Sign me up. Norman really wanted that bonus so he could save up for his trip to the Arizona Mining and Mineral Museum even faster.
They're rocks, Hank.
No, they're minerals. Jesus, Maria.
Norman continued filing reports while watching the slot closely, waiting to see who the new winner would be. He saw the boss's door open and sat with bated breath while the boss made a show of changing the nameplate. As the boss finished changing it and went back into his office, Norman got up to look at the new Employee of the Month. As Norman approached the plaque, he was able to see the name displayed more clearly than from his desk. He was confused. The nameplate read Jason Goldberg. Norman recognized that name. Jason was the second best worker in the office after Norman, who had been the Employee of the Month for 3 months running. But, I mean, it was very clear who the better worker was. Bro, why is Norman hoarding all of these bonuses? Let Jason have a chance, all right? You had it for 3 months. It's time for a shift. Norman quickly went into the boss's office and knocked politely on the door and waited for permission to enter, sure that it was a mistake and that the boss would rectify this as soon as he was notified. Upon entering the office, the boss emitted a heavy sigh.
I knew this was coming,
he muttered to himself.
"Please take a seat, Norman,"
the boss said. After Norman sat, he continued.
"I'll be frank, you're definitely the best worker here by a large margin, but it's a little demoralizing for the rest of the guys if they can never win."
That's my thought exactly. Good bossing, boss. Norman opened his mouth to tell the boss that it was okay, but he was interrupted.
"Please, Norman, I don't want any arguments."
Norman tried to tell him again that it was quite all right, and again the boss interjected with,
"Listen, if you're gonna play hardball, I'll just give you a raise equal to the bonus. It'll amount to the same thing anyway. At least like this, other people could be happy too."
Norman thanked the boss and went back to filing reports. Bro, that astrological zodiac prediction is still coming true. How did you do that, Norman? Oh, you twisted my arm, you talked me into it. He didn't say anything. I think the boss just has some deep-set guilt about the entire situation. Maybe he's just as anxious a human as Norman. I always do love to visit this subreddit. It makes me feel human, if only for a little while, and I hope it did the same for all of you as well. Thank you so much for watching, spending your time with me today. I hope you like, comment, subscribe so we could increase the reach of the channel. Share the video around. Follow me on all the social medias. I appreciate you. I'd also like to thank doubly my Patreon patrons, my YouTube channel members, helping to support the channel. If you don't want to sign up for a month-to-month thing, you can also do the little thanks button under the video. Your contribution is greatly appreciated. But if you can't contribute, you know, that's fine. Just come on back, check out what we're doing tomorrow. It's gonna be fun! Wash your hands, keep yourself safe out there, friends, and of course, always remember that you are loved, you are worthy, and you definitely deserve it. I shall see you in the next one, so until then, bye-bye.
It's only worth it if you work for it. I won't stop till they hear me now. I won't stop till I wear the crown.